Okay, good. Audio check worked. I turned the top speakers back off, and I put my headphones back on. Okay, no one's here yet, so I'll just do a quick little recap of basics for the people that are on now, just to keep things rolling. Obviously, remember, first thing you always want to do is move your anchor point. That's always step one, so you select your layer and you use the pan behind tool, which is right up here next to the camera, and you click on your anchor point and you move it to wherever you want. If you hold down Command or Control, it'll snap it to a corner or an edge, and from there that will influence all your animation, meaning rotation. It'll now rotate from the center like a propeller blade, like that. I'll hit undo, and if I wanted it to swing from a corner like a pendulum, I'd move the anchor point up to the corner, and now it's going to swing from the corner like a pendulum. So the anchor point influences all your animation. First you move your anchor point after you know what you want to do. Then you move the playhead to where you want your animation to start. And then you click on the playhead for what you want to animate, the stopwatch. So you click on the stopwatch. And under transform are the basics: position, scale, rotation, and opacity. And if I want the opacity to fade out at about the 2-second mark, I click that stopwatch. And then you move the playhead to whatever time, let's say 1 second, and then you change the amount. So it's really just making changes across time and space. You need a minimum of 2 keyframes whenever you click one of the stopwatches to change something, and you need at least 1 frame apart. Like I can move a couple frames and then send it back up to 100 if I want to. So I've got a slower fade out and then a faster fade in. The further the keyframes are apart, the slower the change, and the closer they are together, the faster the change. So that's the basics. Move the anchor point, then move the playhead, then click the stopwatch for what you want to change, move the playhead again at least 1 frame, and make your changes. Now these are called linear keyframes. That means there's no change across time. It's a steady, constant motion, like the hands of a clock or the gear of a machine. To change that, you can right click, go to Keyframe Assistant, then Easy Ease. So what this will do, it'll slowly go out of the first one and slowly go into the next one, and slowly out of that one and slowly into the next one. This button right here next to the timeline playhead is the speed graph. Clicking that opens up the speed graph. You will not be able to work with curves like this if you have not eased your keyframes. That's why I eased them first before going into the speed graph editor. This button right here will stretch out your grid, or I should say the graph, so that you can fit the view. This one next to the eyeball, this is where you can go from the value graph or the speed graph. The value graph is the value of what's changing. The value is how much it is fading. Here it is at full opacity, and then it's fading out to no opacity and going back up to full opacity. That's the value of what's changing, the scale. The opacity, how much opacity is changing. But the speed graph is for how quickly or how slow you go out of a keyframe and then into the next one. And what you do is you grab this yellow ball here. This is called the influence handle. You click and drag. I hold down Shift to try and keep that yellow square from moving around that you just saw. This square is the keyframe, and it's also the value. So if you move that around, the value of what's happening changes, not the speed in or out of those keyframes. Keep that in mind. So if I drag closer into that square, it's going to go faster out of it. If I drag further away from it, let me put that back up to 0. It's now going slower out of it. Okay, and then this is the speed into the next keyframe. This is it going as almost as quick as possible into it. So it's going very slow out of here and then rapidly speeding into that one. And that's what it's going to look like with the opacity. It's going to quickly fade out at that point. It's easier to see those things with position or scale or rotation, but I just did opacity just for the fun of it. Another fun thing, you click this button again to get out of Graph Editor, and this little slider will zoom in or out of your timeline. One thing you need to realize when you're doing keyframes, you got to think about how many keyframes you've got and where you need them. If I want this to fade out again at the 5-second mark, I can click this empty diamond over here. This creates a keyframe. And this, when you do it this way, as opposed to changing the value of what's happening over here, I've now got a keyframe that's the exact same as the previous. This will take you to the next keyframe, and this little white arrow over here takes you to the previous. So you can always make sure your playhead is snapped on a keyframe, because if you make any changes again, then you're going to add extra keyframes you don't want. So between these two keyframes, the value is not changing. So this is how you keep the text up without it fading back out until you want it to fade out again. Let's say I want to fade out right here. Then I can go and just change my value here. But there's no change in between here because this keyframe is 100 and that keyframe is 100. So thinking out your keyframing is the next big step. Move the anchor point to where you want the motion to move from or come out of. Then move the playhead, click a stopwatch, then move the playhead, make a change, and that's the basics of motion design. Then ease your keyframes, go into, well, remember, you hover over one, right click, and you can ease them that way, or you can hit F9. There's lots of ways of doing it. So you ease them, then you go into your speed graph, and you adjust the graph on how you want the acceleration in or out of those keyframes. That's the basics. You master that, and then you can move on to the more intermediate things. I'm going to put this back up to 100% right here. And there we go. And I'm so much happier that there's very little lag tonight. So I made some changes to the settings. It seemed to work out fine. So while I'm waiting for more people to go on, I'm going to go ahead with going over the basics while I'm waiting for more people to hop on. Once you've got those basics done of starting up your workflow, remember I'm going to move my anchor point first to the center, and then I'm going to add some text. The selection arrow is what you use for moving things around. Now, my anchor point for the text is down here at the corner, which is pretty good because it'll help me to scale it much more easily while keeping it in there. So, I've now got two items. I've got a solid, and I've got some text. A next thing that helps with your motion design is parenting. Parenting can be done. This right here is the modes section of After Effects. If I click toggle switches and modes down here in the corner, I should say down here at the bottom, I click that. Now I'm in my switches. And you can see right here parents and link is in both the switches and the modes. I'm going to stay in my switches just for the next part. To parent one object to another, you can use the pick whip over here on the side, or you can use the drop down menu here. I prefer people to get used to the pick whip because it is used when you're doing expressions, and it's very helpful to get good at pick whipping. So what this means now, whatever I do to the shape layer will happen to the text as well. So I can twirl down the arrows. Always feel free to experiment, see what's inside the arrows. Lots of hidden things in After Effects. Now with rotation, the first number right here is complete rotations, and the second number is a number of degrees. And I'm going to want this to spin around one full rotation. So I've got my anchor point where I want it. Then next step, obviously move the playhead to where you want the motion to start. Then you click on the stopwatch for what you want to animate over time. Hello again to the new people hopping on in. You're not missing anything. I'm just doing a recapper to fill some time. So I've got my stopwatch, my anchor points there, my playhead's where I want the motion to start, and let's say 2 seconds in, I want this to do one full rotation. So I click that first number, type in a 1, and hit the enter key. And what you'll notice is that the text will move with it. These blue bars at the edges of your timeline, that's your render area. You can slide them back and forth. You'll see the playhead, you'll see the mouse change to this arrow. That means you're changing the length of your render area. And that's good to get a looping animation so you could look at your motion closer. And then you just hit the space bar to preview your motion. So again, I'm going to select my keyframes. You can marquee drag over them. You can click the word to select all the keyframes of that value. Never click the stopwatch again. If you click the stopwatch again, you lose all your keyframing. It's a bad idea. Either select the word rotation or marquee drag over the ones you want. I'm going to hover over one, right click, go to keyframe assistant and easy ease. Now these are easy eased. I can go to my speed graph over here. I'm going to enlarge my speed graph by clicking there. Double checking I'm in the speed graph. Yep. Now I select a keyframe. And do I want this to go faster out of it and slower into it? Sure. So I'll go very fast out of it, very fast out of the first keyframe, and very slow into the next keyframe. So now we'll get less of a mechanical animation and it'll have a little bit more character to it. So now you see that? It's changing the acceleration of it. That's the purpose of experimenting with the speed graph. Remember, this is the closer you go into this first keyframe is the faster you're going out of that keyframe. And then the further away you go from the next keyframe, it's the slower you're going into it. And if you like the acceleration, but say you think this animation's a little too fast, but I like the way the keyframes are moving with their velocity, you can always pick one keyframe and click and drag it. Remember, the further apart, the slower the motion, the closer together, the faster. So I liked my speed graph, but I want a little bit more subtlety there. So all I did was just move my keyframe a little further away. And that's the next part of the basics. You've got move the anchor point first, then move the playhead, click the stopwatch you want, move the playhead again, at least one frame minimum, then make a change. You need a minimum of 2 keyframes to make any changes in After Effects, and any of my students who just came in, just enter into the chat box. And then, select your keyframes, right click over them, easy ease them, then go into your speed graph. You're not seeing anything here because I don't have my keyframes selected. So to do that, I'm just going to click the word rotation, and now you can see them again. And with parenting, not only are the objects staying together, but I'm doing more motion with less keyframes because I've got that one parented to the other. So any changes I do to this will automatically affect that. It's a nice, easy way to work. That's the next step up in the basics. So while I'm waiting for more of my students to file in, I'll just keep on going. Right now, everything we've covered is two-dimensional design. Now to go from, at this point, I'm going to do expressions. So we've got this rotation going on here. I'm going to put an expression in the position. To do an expression, hold down the Alt or Option key when you're clicking a stopwatch. So I'm going to put it in the position, and the first basic one everyone learns is wiggle. I just double click to fill it out. And the first number is how many times a second. So I'll do 3 times a second, comma, let's do 500, a large value. Then you click out of the expression, because if you're still in the expression and you hit the space bar to preview, it won't work. It has to be exact. So that's the way the easiest expression works. And you can see the position randomly moving around. Now, that is just applying a blanket keyframe. A blanket expression. So I'm going to undo that. Let me get rid of that expression. Now, here's what we're going to do. Let me get rid of this expression in here. All right. We've got this rotating around once like that. Okay? Beautiful. But I want this to move side to side while wiggling only up and down. So I'm going to move my playhead, click the position stopwatch, then move it again further in time and change the position. And I just realized I don't like where that's starting. So I'm going to hit this white arrow to go to my previous keyframe. And I'm going to move it further over to here. So here's the motion. It's moving from one side to the next. And it has the rotation still applied. So with these keyframes, I can enter an expression, even though I've keyframed. I hold down Alt or Option, and I click that stopwatch, and I type in the same exact expression, wiggle, and I believe I did 3, let's just try 200. And I click out of it. So what's going to happen is it's still going to move side to side, but you'll see a wiggle expression applied to the up and down while it's rotating around from the center. So see that? It's still moving from side to side, but I've got that random wiggle happening as it moves. That's an example of using an expression and then using an expression with keyframes applied and how to parent things together. So I'm going to delete these layers. The next thing I'm going to go over, I'm waiting for everyone to arrive. I've got a shape like this. Okay, I deselected the shape, selected it again. You can tell it's selected by this white box around it. Just clicking off of it will deselect it. Or you could hit Command A to select all, Command Shift A to unselect all. So I've got my layer selected. I'm going to grab my pan behind tool, and for this one I'm going to move the anchor point down to the bottom middle. Okay, so I'm going to twirl down rotation. I want you to watch what happens. It's just rotating like that. It's not very, it's all right, fine. It's kind of like a seesaw, because this is the fulcrum right there. Now, as I said before, this is modes. So you see modes right there. You click toggle switches and modes. These are your switches. You could always just click this button to go back and forth between the two of them. I want to be in my switches. With this layer selected, I'm going to click the 3D cube. Now everything I showed you before was 2D animation. 2D is nice and flat like an old style cartoon. Once you click that 3D enable for this layer, you see the anchor point changes. This is called a gizmo. You've got Y, which is up and down. You've got X, which is side to side. And you've got Z, which is closer or further from the camera. Now, I showed you this was tottering like a seesaw. Now, I can have it swing like a door opening and closing off of the Y-axis. If I use the Z-axis, it pops up and down like a pop-up book. Or I could do the Z-axis and get that seesaw motion. I've now got 3 axes to animate off of. That gives me much more play as a designer. Okay, and also now I've got space closer and further from the camera. This is 2.5D because I'm still using flat items, but now I can spread them out closer or further from the camera. And I'll show you what that looks like. So I've got my red square, and I'm going to make a yellow star. Now, I want you to notice I deselected first before I drew that, because if I did not deselect, this star would be put into the same layer as that square, and I don't want that. I'm going to change the name of this by hitting the Enter key, and I'll call this square. And I'll select this layer. Oh, wait, let me try that again. Let me enter. There we go. And then I click here, hit Enter, and I'll call this star. Okay, and now some people get a little confused. Hello, for the people that just joined, and make sure you enter into the chat box if you're one of my students. This word fill, if I click the word fill, I get the menu box. I can make it a gradient if I want. I can make it a solid, or I can give it no fill. I'm going to give it a solid fill. We'll go into the stroke later. And then the color icon. This is what I click to change the color. So if you want to go from a solid to a stroke, you click the word. Same thing with stroke. If I want to add a stroke to this, I click the stroke button, and I can add a solid stroke to it. This is where I can change the width of it. And then I just click on the color to change the color of the stroke. but I do not want a stroke for this, so I'm going to click the word, then click none. I've now got two shapes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to 3D enable the second shape, okay? And I'm going to make a third shape, and it's going to be a circle. And for this, I'm going to make it green, okay? And I'll put with the pan behind tool, I'm going to put it right here in the middle, and I'm going to 3D enable that. Now, I'm going to select all three shapes, hit the P key. P is position, R is rotation, S is square, T is transparency. They're the four basics of your motion: position, scale, rotation, and transparency. So I'm going to go to position. So this first star right here, I'm going to give it a positive. Let's do 6,000. Like that. And then this one I'll rename circle. Like that. And I'll go negative 6,000 for this. Like that. Okay. Now I'm going to add a camera. So to do that, I go layer new. And this is where you add anything. Type, solid, lights, nulls. It's all right here. Here's my camera. I'm just going to stick with the default for now. Now if I go, I'm in 2.5D. I can click on my camera. The first camera rotates things around in any axis. And you can already see the relation between these shapes changing. That's called parallax. So if I hit the C key, that's for camera. Again, I hit C. This is an orbit. If I hold down Shift Y drag, it'll only rotate around one axis. So that's going around that one. You could also do the up and down for it as well. If I hit C one more time, this is the pan and tilt. So if I hold down Shift, I do a pan from side to side. If I hold down Shift and then up and down, I'm doing a tilt up and down. And then the last camera, hitting C again, this is zoom in and zoom out. So I'm going to drag down to zoom out so that we can see where the green circle went. And then I'm going to rotate my camera. And again, the distance between these and the relation of the shapes is changing. That is called parallax. It's a very powerful, useful tool to get some interesting camera movement. What's closest to the camera, let's just change that from negative 6,000 to 0. See if there it is. So let's move this a little closer to the camera, not too far away. So this number on the left, that's the x-axis, this is the y-axis, and this is the z-axis. And you'll see the circle looks like it's moving faster than the other two. What's closest to the camera moves moves fastest. What's furthest from the camera moves slowest, okay? That's parallax. So another way of pushing your designs. And this can be anything. It can be video clips, it can be photos. I'm just using basic shapes to teach you these concepts, and then you can apply them creatively the way that you want. Remember, each layer you click 3D with the cube to 3D enable it, and now we're at 2.5D. Okay? So that's an example of parallax and spreading things out. This is still 2.5D. 3D is adding depth, and I'll be going into 3D later on. I already covered it with my students, but I'll save that for the next virtual lecture when I'm waiting for people to get online. So we've covered some of the basics. Now I'm going to show you, let's add a little bit of texture here. One second. Okay, I just had to mute the mic for a moment. Let me see, where's my art? Just gotta view this by icons, it'll be easier to find that way. Oh, here we go. Alright, yeah, we'll do that. Okay, so I now have this JPEG over here in my project panel, and add it into my timeline. I just drag it into there, and there is the texture that you're seeing. Okay, and I'm going to add some type. I'm going to call this, oops, hello. All right, still waiting for my students to pop in. Again, this is a mandatory, not mandatory, it's optional. So that's why I'm just showing some of these basics to you now to fill the time in case they need any questions answered. All right, next thing I'm going to teach you about is alpha mats. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Clicking the eyeball icon here will hide. Some people call it shy or blind. I'm going to hide that by clicking the eyeball icon. And then right here next to active camera, if I click that, that will show you, let me make this type something other than white. I'll make it red. This checker box around it is the transparent area. That's called alpha. And this red in here, the positive space, that is where the shape is. So this checker box is the alpha. Here's the positive space. And this red box you see around it, that's a rectangle or a square, that's called the bounding box. And I'm going to be getting into that in a moment because it's very important to know the difference between alpha, positive space, and bounding box. So you see there's nothing around this. This is the positive space, and around here is the alpha. And if I want to have this texture in the shape of this type, I would use what's called an alpha mat from this text. The way I break things down, I use the expression, you put a mask over your face. So the shape that you want to use goes on top, and what you're covering up goes below. So with the shape of the text, hello, above the grunge texture, I click on the texture layer, the thing we're actually going to be masking. And so right here, I'm in my switches. I need to be in my modes. So to do that, I click toggle switches and modes down here. And then here's my modes. The reason I need to be in modes right here, this is where the blending modes are. So if I clicked here, I'd get a different look. See that changed right there? Each different blending mode will give you a different look. I'm going to set that back to normal, the default. So that's your blending modes. But here, track mats. So like I said, this is the shape I want to use as my mask. That goes on top. I select the layer below. Then under the track mat column, I'm going to choose alpha mat. So now, let me change my resolution to full. You can see I've got my alpha around here, and then the texture filling in the positive space of the word hello. Okay? Now, watch what happens here. I'm going to get my word, and I'm going to move it. And you'll see what happens. The word moves, but the texture inside moves as well. If I want this to happen, like say I was doing a sci-fi special effect, and I was doing a body scanner, and you wanted to see a body on top and then the skeleton below, this is what you would do. You would just have the alpha mat moving over it without the image being parented to it. But say I like the texture right here, but I want to stay with the text as it's moving. For that, I take the texture and I pick whip it up to the word hello. So now I've got hello being my alpha mat shape with the texture now parented to it, and you see it doesn't move. It stays with the shape. So no matter what happens to this, if I scale it up, it moves with it, and they stay together. And that's a much more professional look, keeping your textures parented to the type. That is an example of alpha mats. Now, alpha invert is the opposite of that, and I'll show you in a second. So to undo that, I'm going to click off no track mat, and we've got this. Let me zoom out one. Let me move that texture over a little bit so it's covering up the screen. There we go. All right, so alpha mat is the shape knocking out what's around it, but the opposite of that is alpha invert, and that is sort of like a cookie cutter effect. To do that, I'm going to add a solid, so I go layer new, solid, and color is arbitrary, but I'm going to make it green just so we can see what's going on here. Click yes. Okay, here we go. So I've got my red text on top, my green solid, and below that is the texture. Okay? The way an alpha invert works is I've got my type, and then any image you want, you could probably even have video here if you want, but the layer below the type, that you select and choose alpha invert. And you see what happens here. I've got the solid around, so if I scale up the word hello over time, so I'll click here for my keyframe, I'll go forward a couple frames and I'll scale it up. You get a fly-through effect that you see in a lot of title sequences and movie credits. That's how you do a fly-through. You do an alpha invert. And also, if I put my anchor point here in the middle, you see it works better. And a little note, when you're doing things with fly-throughs, solid shapes work best. Like this L would be good to fly through because it's solid and doesn't have any holes inside it. So if you're doing logos and you got a solid shape or a solid color, that's good and it'll help with your fly-through effect. So alpha invert is like a cookie cutter, and alpha is, let me hide this, turn off my alpha invert matte, put this directly, remember it has to be directly above it for it to work. And it's one layer revealing one layer. So I'm going to turn that type back on, go here, change that to alpha matte, and that's the difference between an alpha matte and a alpha invert matte. When I said one layer revealing one layer, suppose you've got multiple layers. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this alpha matte right here, and let's turn back on my type. So I've got my type. I'm going to deselect it. Whenever you have something selected, if you put a shape over it, you're creating a mask, not a shape layer, and I'll get into that next. So I've got one shape here and one shape here. And I want all three of these shapes to be part of the alpha matte. And I said it's one layer revealing one layer. So I select all three layers that I want, right click, and choose Precompose. And I'll call this Reveal. And I always move all attributes into new composition. It makes things much easier. Your keyframes go there, and it will really help with your effects. So now when I go to the layer below it and choose alpha matte, all three shapes work with the alpha matte. So it's always one layer revealing one layer. So if you've got multiple shapes you want to use as an alpha matte, pre-compose them together. Same thing with the layer below that's being revealed. If it's multiple layers like text and color and images, pre-compose those together, and then you'll be one layer revealing one layer. Always remember that and you'll be fine. So I'm going to undo that. All right. Next, I'm going to show you Luma mattes. So I've got my type here. Actually, here we go. I'm going to make a new solid. I just right-clicked in an empty space to do it. So I've got my solid. I'll call this Reveal 2. Okay, fine. And then this time, I'm going to do a gradient ramp on it. And let's do radial. Sure, why not? And here's a fun thing. With these crosshairs over here, there's a fast way of learning After Effects. If you click on that crosshair once, anywhere you click next will be that. Rather than figuring out the X and Y coordinates, you just click once on that and then click again inside to have it line up. So I'm going from black to white. And let's pretend I want to reveal all those shapes plus the gradient. So it's always one layer revealing one layer. So I select the layers I want to group together, right click and choose Precompose, and I'll call this Reveal 3, move all attributes to new comp. Okay, now I've got my gradient above, and I'm going to go to, wait, let me see something. Okay. Let me pre-compose this and see what happens. Nope, okay. So let's move this a little further out. Like that. Okay, sure. I'll go back to my switches and modes. Oh, okay, yeah, all right. So that doesn't need to be so far out. Let me undo that. Okay. Now the layer below that is being revealed, I'm going to choose Luma matte. And what you can see here, what's going to be pure white will be 100% transparent, and what's pure black is 0% transparent. So if I go to my layer above, and I change these values around, you can see the transparency changing. And also, I can animate this. That is the difference between an alpha matte and a Luma matte. Luma mattes can be pretty useful for special effects and custom transitions. So Luma means values from white to dark, and white will be 100% of something, black will be 100% of something else, and 50% gray will be 50% of that. So it can be used for visual effects and transitions as well. So we've quickly covered anchor points, the basics of motion. Then we talked about parenting, and we also did 2.5D and parallax, alpha mattes and Luma mattes. And so far no one is in yet, so I'm going to give them to about 7:15. So I'll give a little bit more of a free lecture here. So we covered those. Now let's get into masking. So I'm going to put my texture here, and I'm going to make it fit the screen. Okay, there we go. Now I'd said before, if you've got nothing selected and you draw a shape layer, you make a shape. There's my shape. And I'm going to use my selection arrow, and I'm going to delete it. And delete the layer there. I just hit backspace to delete it. If I've got the layer selected and I draw on it with a star, I've now created a mask. Okay? And you can see there's my alpha around it. So whatever shape you use, let me hit, you could even have more than one shape. So I could use the pen tool. I'm clicking and dragging, and I'm going to close that up there. So you can draw shapes, or you can use shapes for the pen tool to draw them. Now, here's my masks below. You can get to them by hitting the M key, but they automatically appeared. Add, right here, to change the color of the mask, you just click on that color icon. I'm going to do, let's see what's going to be real easy. Let's do dark red. Okay. Let me turn the alpha off. Okay, so watch the red one over here. It's set to add. If I choose subtract, it knocks a hole in there. So that's what subtract does. Add will add what's ever inside that mask. So I'm going to change this one back to add. So you're only seeing what's inside the masks I drew, and it subtracted everything else around them. Oh, hey there, Sam. Thank you for the refreshers, but I have to get some sleep before work. Okay. Are there any questions you have for before you head out? And I'll field any questions for your final project. And if not, you could email me if I missed you. I just looked up and saw that. All right, and I'm going to leave this one online so anyone can just briefly go through it and find out what they need. All right, so I'm going to select my layer and hit the F key. And I've still got my masks, but now I've got feather. And I'm going to change that value. And you see it's creating a softer edge as opposed to a hard edge. It's sort of like feathering in Photoshop. So that's one of the advantages. Some of my students ask, is it better to silhouette things out in Photoshop or in After Effects? If you're not doing a lot of elaborate things and you're more confident with Photoshop, sure, that will work. But if you do it in here, I'm going to twirl down these mask options for you. Remember, anything with a stopwatch can be animated in After Effects. You just move the playhead to where you want the motion to start. I'm going to choose mask expansion on each. And then you move the playhead forward in time. So for the blue one, I am going to expand it outward. And for the red one, I'm going to expand it inward so it shrinks in. And I'm going to adjust my render area and hit the space bar. And you see one growing and the other one shrinking. This is a way to get some custom transitions or for visual effects. So now you know how to add a mask, feather a mask, and expand or contract a mask. Remember, anything with a stopwatch can be animated in After Effects. You just got to move at least one frame and make a change. Okay, so that's the difference between masks and mats. And I want you to observe something. I'm going to delete these masks by selecting the mask layer and deleting it. I'm going to draw a square with this selected, so I've got a mask. Okay, now watch what happens when I feather this. It's going to feather in from each side uniformly. Okay, now if that's not the look you want, you can go to your pen tool and choose Mask Feather and click on some points. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this mask, and right here, delete it again. I'm going to use the pen tool, and with the pen tool, I'm drawing a square here. All right, now when I do my feather, I can click and add some points. And those points I added, when I drag away, you see it's only feathering those areas. And I can increase or decrease the amount of feathering that's happening. And this is how you can sit something into a scene really nice for your compositing. So you see that we have a nice firm edge along here, and then it softens out that way. That is how you can get a varied feathering in your masking. You use the mask feather tool, which is up here, whereas if you were to just mask, it would feather it from every edge. All right, let's keep this party going. Give my students some more time, just in case, because some of them have work. I'm going to do no fill, and I'm going to do a solid stroke, and I'll make it 13 so it's big enough to see. So I'm just going to click and drag like this. And I'll grab my pen tool, my select tool, and I'll just move these a little bit further down so we have this. So it's a shape layer now because we used the shape tool to create it. And I'm going to twirl down with the layer here, and I'm going to twirl down the contents. I'm going to twirl down shape, and I'm going to twirl down path. Now, some of my students, I keep telling them this. If you're doing basic shapes like, squares, circles, and paths, you should do them in After Effects so you don't have to import them in from Illustrator, and that just kills up time and it's a waste. And the benefit, like if you brought them in from Illustrator, then you'd have to convert them into shape layers anyway to do what I'm going to show you next. So I drew this path in After Effects, and like I said, there's no serious gradients to it, and I'm just treating it as a shape, so it's always better to do it in here. If I click, I'm going to move the playhead to where I want it to start. Then I'm going to click the stopwatch for path. I'm going to move forward in time, and I want to show you something. I'm going to hold down Shift and click this path point right here. Okay, so I'm going to click on this single path now that I isolated. First I had to hit Shift to deselect that path point, and then I clicked on it to select it. You can do two things with paths. You can move the path points. You can animate them that way. I'm going to click on this one over here. And I'm going to go to the Bezier curve handle, and I'm going to adjust that like such. And I'm going to adjust it from here. And then for this one, I'm going to move the path point and adjust the Bezier curve. And what you're going to see happen is this. You can animate not only the path points, but the Bezier curve handles as well. That is the power and the beauty of making your shapes in After Effects, because you've got complete control over them as an animator. So now you see how you can get some interesting motions. And I'm going to dive into that in a second. I'm going to go down to stroke here, and I'm going to click on the plus sign so I've got dashes. Let's do less dashes. So you see it's still animating its shape, even though I gave it some dashes. I'm going to click the offset button, stopwatch, and then I'm going to, let's have them go in the opposite direction. Okay, so the shape of the path is changing, and the dashes are moving along it. Okay? Just showing you some ways where you can be creative and think up some things. If I change the stroke width, you'll see the dashes get thicker. Okay? That's one way you can do it. Also, here under stroke, you've got butt cap. I can change that to round, and I can change my miter joint to round. I've got a completely different look going on already. And that took very little time. That's an example of animating path points and Bezier curve handles, as well as an offset to a path. And that's going to lead up to, let me select this and delete it. I've got my pen tool. I'm going to click 1, 2, 3. I'm going to deselect. And then for here, I'm going to click 1, 2, 3. So I've got a straight with no Bezier curve handles and 3 Bezier curve handles. I'm going to click on the first one over here. I'm going to go down to my path, move my playhead, click on path, click on the stopwatch for path, and my selection arrow. So I'm going to move forward a little bit, and I'm going to deselect the middle path point. Then I'm going to select it again, and I'm going to move it out a little bit. I'll move this one back a bit. I didn't move it that far. There we go. So you can see how it's like a person getting ready to walk. Like such. And then I would move this path point because of the follow through with it. Like that. Boom. That's a straight leg walk. There's no bend in the human body between the hip and the knee and the ankle. There's a bone going through it. So that's more of a realistic motion for that. Now, over here on this side, we've got 3 Bezier curve handles. So here's a fun fact. If you select a layer and you hit the U key, that will show just your keyframes, and it frees up some time. So I'm going to go do the same thing. I'm going to twirl down my shape, go to my path, move my playhead, go click the path. Now I'm going to move forward, line this up with the next one. I'm going to hold down shift. Okay, so I'm going to move my knee out, oops, didn't want to do that, so I'll grab my path point like that, move with the next one, I'll swing this through. Let's fix that curve handle a little bit. We'll line that up, fix this over a little bit, like that, line that up a little bit better, and we'll move this here, and then we'll go to the next one, like this, and we'll compare them. So the one on the right is more of a noodly type of animation. The one on the left is a little more rigid. So it's sort of like an Adventure Time, Cartoon Network type of thing. That's what happens when you animate with Bezier curve handles. It might be what you want, it might not what you want, but just something to experiment with. And if at any point you want to change that, you can go to your pen tool, convert vertex. Let's make that straight, and now let's see what that did. See? Completely different motion. It made it straight for just that one keyframe. That's funny. See, it created a new keyframe right there. That's something you got to watch out for. If you're not over a keyframe when you change something, you're always going to create a new one. That's an example of animating path points. All right, we're covering a lot of the basics here tonight while waiting for people to fill in. Looks like they're not going to be using much of this optional lab time. So like I said, I was just filling up the time with a virtual lecture. And I hope you're finding it useful for all the beginning animators out there. So we covered some of the basics with shapes. Let's do this. So I'm going to go back to my path tool. And I've got my path. Okay. And there's my shape layer. A shape layer, I always tell my students, treat it like an empty salad bowl. When you want to add something to it, you can go to add up here. It's got to be selected. Or you can twirl down here, and there's an add down here. But remember, the layer you want to add to must be selected. So I click add, and then I go to trim paths. And you go, well, what are trim paths? Well, you've seen them in commercials and TV a lot. I'm going to twirl down here. Start and end. Start is the first point I made. End is the last point I made. So I'm just going to slide along here. And if I want to go from left to right, that means I'm going to animate my end keyframe. So I click here. I move forward in time, and I created a keyframe. So I've got two keyframes that are both 100, which means nothing's changed over time. I'm going to go back to my first one, click on it once, change it to 0, and now it's drawing on over time. We've all seen that effect. Oh, no, I'm good, thank you. Appreciate it, though. Okay, so that is how to do a trim path. You're drawing on in one direction. And if you want to draw off while you're drawing on, you click the opposite keyframe, opposite stopwatch. So for me, that's the start, because I started with the end. And I just click that. So I went from 0 to 100, and then my other one is going from 0 to 100. So it's drawing off as it draws on, all right? And what you see a lot, I'm going to hit the U key. That's how you do trim paths. If you want to draw off and on, you animate both. If you want to draw on, then you just do one of these stopwatches. So I'm going to duplicate this. Let me undo that. I'm going to make this a little thicker, just so you can see what's going to happen next. Much easier. All right, let's see what happens here. All right, so I've got my animation happening, and I'm going to, with the layer selected, hit Command D, and that's going to duplicate. And when you duplicate, that will duplicate all your keyframes and any effects you put on. And I'm going to slide this just a little bit past. That's called offsetting my layers. They're not lined up anymore. If I change the color from green to yellow, like such, you will see it is following along, keeping all the same keyframes as the layer below. And you see a gap here. If I want to fix that gap, I just move it a little closer, like that. So now that gap is gone. And I would move it one more frame if I wanted to make it perfect. That's an example of offsetting animation. And let me do this. Where's my texture? I'm going to put my texture here. Oops. So here's my texture layer with nothing selected. I'm going to draw a shape like this. And I'm going to add trim paths to it. And I'm going to move my playhead. And I'm going to twirl down my trim paths. And I'm going to animate the end. Like such. So you see it drawing off. Like that. Alright? Now, I'm going to bring this back to the beginning. I'm going to click Toggle Switches and Modes. The layer beneath, I'm going to set to Alpha Matte. And you'll see it drawing off something. So we've all seen this drawing things on. So that's an example of using paths as an alpha matte. You can have animated alpha mattes. You can do whatever you want with them. But I'm just showing you this technique of using a trim path to reveal or hide something. Remember, it's always one layer revealing one layer. Oh, hey, Ariana. How's it going? Oops. Didn't mean to do that. Let me click back here. Why isn't it letting me go back? Expand. Okay, there we go. All right, great. I'm going to save this for you, Ariana. I went through a lot of stuff quickly, but obviously you'll have access to asking me questions about any of this stuff deeper. I basically covered anchor points, moving the playhead. You need 2 keyframes. I showed how to do alpha mattes, alpha invert matte, Luma matte, track mattes, animating path points. Let me see, what else can we go over? And like I said, I'm just using this as a short virtual lecture because none of my students are in, but I'm just filling up the time because I said I would. And it's a good way for people to learn, fill up their time during these rough days. So, Ariana, do you have any questions on anything you want to ask me? Oh, I'm doing well, thank you. That's very awesome. Appreciate it. Okay, let me think. I did masks as well. Can we go over? Yes. Oh, perfect. Great idea. The puppet tool. All right. So, you know how to animate path points, like I showed earlier. Where if I've got, 1, 2, 3, like this, I twirl down. Let me make that a little thinner. Go to my contents, shape, path, click path, move my playhead. I grab my arrow tool, deselect one of the path points. There we go. Select it again. I can move this forward, and I can move that like that. And that is how you do the path tools. Now, the puppet pin is something that is completely different. And I'm going to get an image to show you. 1 second. Let me pick from the internet. I'm just grabbing a photo because the power of seeing this is with an image. And it'll just take 1 second. So I'm going to go to color in Google, go transparent. And I'm going to find a quick person with a transparent background. Won't spend long looking for it. Oh, okay. Let me see. Okay, perfect. All right, let's see if that works. 1 second. So I've got this. Let me hide that. I'm back here. I'm going to import my person. One moment. All right, let me scale them up. And this is just a stock photo I found. 1 second while the lag catches up. Go back to here. Okay, good. Go back to here. Good. All right. Now, it looked like this stopped for a second. Can you still see what's going on? Because my stream stopped. Let me check here. It says I'm still streaming. Let me go to YouTube real fast. Yeah, I'm still streaming here. Okay, now I'm seeing it here. It's weird. My home screen that I'm watching this off of. Okay, yes. I see your AE with the transparent man. Great. It's funny because I'm not seeing it. Let me hit refresh on my end. 1 second. Okay, great. All right. Don't ask me what happened there. That's weird. All right. So I've got my transparent person right here. All right. And here's the way puppet pins work. They're right up here. Nope. That's rotobrush. Here's puppet pin. It's not just puppet pinning what you want to move. You've got to pin down what you don't want to move. So it's almost like the human body. I'm going to put one at the hand, the shoulder, the wrist, and I'm going to pin down the head. Got to pin down the torso. Like that, and like that. Okay. Now, up here at mesh, this will show the mesh. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. If this mesh wasn't covering the person and it wasn't wide enough, the texture would not move, okay? So the mesh is covering what moves. The density, if you increase that, you get a much finer mesh, which will give you less distortions, but it will slow down your render. It's a giant juggling act. You want to make sure you're getting the full character. Let me turn off the thing. See, there's the alpha. It's going past it right there. Turn it back on. You want to make sure you're getting the full character, and you also want to make sure that you've got a nice smooth mesh. So all you do, I've got Remember, you're pinning down what you don't want to move as well as pinning what you want to move. So I move the playhead, and I just click one of my puppet pins, and I move it. And you can click and move more than one at a time. Like that. And I should have pinned his chin down. And then you just move forward some more. And you move again. And you'll see your character moving like such. And let me just zoom in a little bit here. The important thing to notice, watch the fabric of the clothes. It's looking good. It's keeping the texturing. That's why puppet pinning is a useful tool, because with shape characters that you draw, you've got unlimited flexibility, but when you've got JPEG detail, like photo quality pixels, the puppet tool is unbeatable because you can move things around and it keeps all the pixel information. You're just distorting the mesh of the shape that you made that has alpha around it. Okay, do you understand that first part? And then I'll dive a little deeper into it with something else. Okay, great. So I'm going to zoom out here. And remember, you select your layer and you hit the U keys, and that's going to show you all your puppet pins. I'm going to hide this guy. No, actually, I'm just going to delete him. I'm going to bring him back in again. And I'm going to scale him up. So that's the basics. Now here's how you get a little bit deeper into puppet pinning. Go zoom in a little bit. All right. Now I mentioned earlier, when you've got something that has bones, you don't want that noodly animation. Like doing puppet pins the way I showed you is great for worms and octopus arms and snakes, things like that. But if something has bones, and the human arm won't bend between the wrist and the elbow and the shoulder because there's bones there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a puppet pin here, the hand, one at the elbow, and one at the shoulder. But a new thing is I click and hold on there, and you've got the puppet starch pin. I'm going to click and put one in between here, and I'm going to expand it. Nope, nope, don't want to do that. Let me hit undo. And I'll put one right in between here. And what that's going to do is not bend in between there. So if I move my playhead forward and I grab my puppet pin tool, it's not noodling up as much. It's staying more rigid there. It gives you, yep, starch pin. Puppet starch. Oh, puppet pin. I mean, bend looks advanced. I mean, no, puppet advanced pin tool. Interesting. And you see my character flying off because I didn't pin him down. Let's try puppet bend. I'll click there. Oh, look at that. Let's see, what's that doing? Let me put one here. Oh, see, it's changing. I'm spinning around the dial. And look at that. Stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself. Interesting. So that's the puppet bend. That one's new. It's like right there. That's interesting. Yep, Now let's see what the puppet advanced does. We'll put that on his head. And there's a spinner here. Oh, fun. That is wild. So that means, let me hit undo. I'm going to move my playhead. And I'm going to spin this. I'll go outward. Then I'll go here. And then I'll go inward. Not that much. Let me go a little less. Oops. There we go. All right, perfect. And I'm going to turn off my mesh. And let's preview that. That's wild. I'm glad you asked about the puppet pin. I didn't see those new features. That's very funny. But you see, the whole trick to After Effects, and this is, and I'm actually going to show you something I went into earlier, but you're here now. The number one thing is to remember anything with a stopwatch can be animated over time. Yeah. So you just got to remember you need at least 2 keyframes, at least 1 frame apart, and something changing in between time. So the other main thing to remember is to just keep on experimenting with effects and new things inside it. So I'm going to hide this. I'll just delete them, and I'll put my texture back on. And let me scale this down, and I'll show you something else I started covering earlier. Here's another neat little trick. Now, I told you this before, but when you're doing rotate, it's also for evolution and things like that. The first number is full rotations, and the second number is a specific number of degrees. And I'm gonna throw a ramp on this real fast. And see these crosshairs? You click on them once, and then you click somewhere on here, and that's how you can figure out where effects go without doing the X and Y. That's another neat little trick. And I'm gonna do, when you want to apply an effect, this for the people out there that don't know, you just drag it onto the layer, or with the layer selected you can double click. So I told you before, whenever you see these crosshairs, that means you click once and then move. So if I say I click once and I go, this is the top, and then I click on the bottom, the base, and I say this is the base. Now with this effect, I can bend rigid objects back and forth. You see how that's moving? Like, that's how I did the grass swaying and trees swaying. But then I got a drop down here. And always, like I said, experiment. If I go to Marilyn, watch how the bend changes. See, it's going out from the middle now while keeping the top and the bottom rigid. Same effect, a different look. It's all about playing and saying, oh, I know what these do. I'm going to say that's the top, and I'm going to click here, and I'm going to say that's the bottom. And I'm going to go to Turbulent Displace. And I'm going to apply it right here. Let me scale this up. Okay, perfect. Now, remember, like I said, with right here, evolution. I know this first number is full rotations, and the second number is specific degrees. So I'm going to move my playhead, click the stopwatch, go forward in time, and I'm going to do 1 full rotation. So I click once, type in my number, and hit enter. You can already see the texture animating. Okay? So I know what those numbers do. But then I say, oh wait, here's offset. It's got a crosshair, and I know that those are for direction. Now offset, like I said, is which direction this distortion is going to go. I want it to go up. So I clicked the stopwatch. I'm going to move forward. And I'm going to animate this up to there. So now the distortion is happening in an upwards motion over time. And I controlled all that. Now, actually, I want to show you something pretty neat. Do you understand what I showed you with those different settings? Like what the crosshairs do and what the evolution... Okay. Exactly. Yep. Yes, exactly. Yep. Now, check this out. I did this in my last virtual lecture, but I did not put it online. But I'm going to recreate it here real fast. I'm going to turn off the stroke by clicking the word stroke. I'm going to click on the word fill, like that. And I'm going to do red. Sure, like right there. Fine. And I'm going to loosely draw. Yes. Yep, I did the crosshairs for the top and the bottom. And you could also use them for the direction of a effect. So I'm going to start at the top of my flame. Click and drag. It doesn't need to be perfect. There we go. Okay. I'll move forward 3 seconds. Let's do 4 seconds. All right. And remember, you can always adjust your path points and your curve handles after you draw something. All right, you got that so far? Mm-hmm. Got it. Yep. So there's my basic flame shape. All right. So you got that part, Ariana? Because we're going to kick it up a notch. You'll love this. I don't know if I've covered this with you before. Okay, here we go. You ready? We're going to go layer new solid. And color is arbitrary. So just make comp size and hit OK. I've got a solid over there. You good there? Okay, watch this. In the effects, we're going to type in fractal noise, okay? And I've got my solid selected, so I just double click on it and it applies fractal noise to it. All right, you'll love this. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to use the fractal as a displacement map. And displacement maps work off of tones, luminescence, values, white to dark. And I covered this with my Luma mats that I went into earlier. White will be 100% of something, black will be 100% the opposite of that, and 50% gray will be 50% of that effect, okay? So I'm going to make this flame look more like a flame. Now, turbulent displace, you saw how it gives that wavy type of effect. And you might go, oh, that's pretty neat. But what happens is the flame constantly keeps moving up from like the oxygen feeding into it. And it's got this organic motion. And that's when using displacement maps is the way to go. When you need a longer animation that's constantly going in one direction rather than going up and down, and back and forth. That part makes sense so far? Okay. Now, remember fire, the flames go upward. So I'm going to be having this distortion moving upward, okay? Now, we're going to think about, with the flames, what's going to make it look most like organic fire. And you're going to love this. This is called look at this, edit that, okay? And I'm going to teach you how to do it. It's a great way when you don't know what one effect is driving another effect. That's called a compound effect. And I don't know what this should look like to get the look I want. That's when you use techniques like look at this, edit that. So I'm going to hide this by shying it with the eyeball icon. And I'm going to click on my flame. Let me just rename this. I hit the enter key with it selected and I'll call it fire. Like that. And I'll call this one fractal, just so you can follow along easily. So with my fractal, effects in After Effects work best when you pre-compose the layer that you're going to be using to drive the effect. So I'm going to right click on my fractal, pre-compose, and I'll call it fractal space PC, short for pre-comp, and move all attributes. You got to click that button so it goes from gray to blue. Move all attributes and hit OK. All right, you with me so far? Yep. Good. Okay. Now, I want to show you something. And I covered this before, but now's a good time to go into it. These checker boxes, this is the alpha. And this red flame shape, that's the positive space. Okay? And this going around it is the bounding box. All right? Now, this is important to know. I'm going to hide that again. Let me show you something. If I give a light ray to this effect, watch what happens. I move the light ray effect to here. And I'm going to increase the radius and increase the sensitivity. And you see what's happening here. It's hitting the bounding box. Even though there's nothing there, the effect is saying, oh, there's a bounding box. I'm going to stop. Yes, exactly. Okay. So I'm going to copy this. I hit copy. And I'm going to delete it. Now watch what happens. I'm going to select all my flame. The fire. I'm going to pre-compose it. Move all attributes. Hit OK. So bounding box is gone. It's now the edges of the composition. So when I paste that effect onto the pre-comp, look what happens. It goes past that bounding box that was there. Now the effect is doing what I want it to do. This is the perfect example of showing why precomposing is necessary to learn in After Effects and how it's the #1 problem solving. If you got a problem in After Effects, precompose first, and that fixes a lot of things. So I'm going to hit undo, I'm going to hit undo, I'm going to hit undo. So I've got my shape, but my fractal is a pre-comp because, like I said, precomposing fixes a lot of trouble you're going to have down the road. So I'm going to select my fire, and I'm going to type in displace, and I want displacement map. I'm going to click my displacement map and put it on the fire layer. Okay? And up here in displacement map layer in my effects, I choose fractal PC. And I'm going to just by eye look at this, and I'm going to say, okay, about there. All right? And you see my shape is distressed already, okay? You with me so far? One second, my wife just needs to talk to me. I'm going to mute this real fast. And I'm back. Okay, you're good? All right, no worries. Great. Now, I want to see how the fractal we created is going to influence this animation because it's a compound effect, okay? So, I'm going to double click on my fractal PC pre-comp. You got your pre-comp double clicked on and ready? And in my pre-comp, I'm going to select the fractal layer. Let me know when you're there. Okay, good. Now, this is the important part. Up here in my effect controls, there's a padlock next to effect controls. I'm going to click that. And what's going to happen when I go back to my main animation, we'll be able to edit the parameters of the fractal noise and see how it is affecting the main animation. So I'm going to go back to comp 1 over here, or whatever you named your fire, and you see my fractal noise is still set up like this. So I'm going to adjust my contrast. I'm going to lower it and see what happened to the shape. It's smoothed out. So I'm going to increase the contrast. And look what happened. So I'm going to go a little bit less than that because fire wouldn't be that distorted. And then the brightness, let's see what happens if we crank up the brightness. Okay, let's see what happens if we make it a little darker. It's all matter of, okay, going a little darker was a little bit better. It's all matter of experimenting. And then you can go to your fractal type and you could say, let's try cloudy, because fire sort of has a cloudy type look. And the noise type, let's try spline. Okay, so I changed the way that this looks. Let's increase the contrast. Nope, let's decrease it. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. All right, now let's make it a lot darker. Nope, let's make it brighter then. All right, it's all about eyeballing it. All right, now transform. I'm going to make this a lot larger. The larger I have my original texture, the more it's going to give me that flame type look. Because I want a nice large texture, because if it's small parts, it's going to look gloppy like paint. And I don't want that. See how it's all dithered? A larger scale for the texture. Now, I'm going to try and mess around with my contrast some more. Let's try swirly. Nope. Okay, let's try. Nope. Let's try dynamic. Okay, turbulent smooth's doing a little bit better. And I switched to soft spline. I'm just trying different things blindly, but seeing how it affects. Oh, see, that's pretty fun. That's actually very fun. Liking that even better. Because see how we're getting parts flying off like Flame does. So let's try and make it a little darker. Nope, almost. That was pretty nice. All right, I'm kind of liking that. Okay, all right, I'm happy with that. So what I did was I've got turbulent smooth with soft linear, contrast 204, brightness -8, and I put my scale at 394, and I've got this look. Okay? You with me so far? Okay, perfect. Now, so we've distorted the shape into a very organic thing. Like, I love these little flyaways. And I said before, I want fire to move upwards because the oxygen's feeding into it. So, offset turbulence, I click that button. The first one is X side to side. Second value is Y up and down. So I'm going to move my playhead. And I know I'm going to want this to go up. So I just changed that up number. Wait, is that going down? Let's try -20,000. And let's see if it's going down now. Okay, that's a bit too much. Let's do... Wait, let me click U. See where my keyframes are. Nope. Okay, yeah, see, I've got these extra keyframes. That's what's going goofy. Okay, negative is going down. Let's see. So I've got, let me go to my keyframe. We do -5,000. Yep, see my texture is moving upwards. Now let me go back here. There we go. Let me change this brightness a little bit, see what that does. Nope, let me make it a little brighter then. There we go. I mean, that was the contrast. Let me change this. See, it's all a matter of changing your settings till you get the look you want. Like that. And I'm going to knock this down to quarter so you can see a little bit faster and easier. See that? It gets even better. You'll love this. Okay, so let me just mess around with this a little bit more. Let me increase the contrast some more. Nope. Let me decrease the contrast. There we go. And let me... Oh, actually, yeah, let's try about there. Let's see what we got going on. That's much better. All right, I'm happy with that. Okay, so that's the building block. All right, you ready for this? Now, before I said when you duplicate a layer, you duplicate all the keyframes and the effects. So the fire, I'm going to duplicate that. But first, let me move the anchor point down to the bottom, because I'm going to want to scale it from the bottom. And you'll see what's going to happen here. So I move my anchor point. Now I'm going to duplicate that fire. And I'm going to change the color to a bit of an orange, like this. I'm going to scale it down slightly. And on this one, I'm going to edit its fractal noise a little bit differently than the other one. Just to make it a little bit different from the other one, but not too much. And in here, I'm going to click off my padlock. And then I'm going to go back here. And I'm going to adjust this. There we go. Now I'm getting the independent control over this one that I want. Yeah, see, these numbers are different on the two layers. Okay. And then I'm going to do one more. I'm going to duplicate it one more time. And this one I'm going to make a little bit more yellow, so it's getting brighter towards the middle. And I'm going to scale it down a little bit more. This is why I put the anchor point at the middle. I mean the bottom. So if I wanted, I could do a blending mode to change all these, but I want this cartoony type of fire look right here. I'm happy with that, so I'm going to hit save. And I'm going to put a new adjustment layer. I'm going to put it below my fractal, because the adjustment layer, any effect I put on it will affect any layer below it, and I do not want this affecting my fractal. And on this one, I'm going to put a glow. So I'm going to throw the glow on my adjustment layer. And then I'm going to go to my project. I'm at 32 bits per channel. If you're not, go to your project panel, and right next to the trash can, you'll see a number, 8 BPC. That's 8 bits per channel. You hold down Option and you click on it. That goes to 16. Hold down Option, click on it again, and you get 32 bits per channel. When you're doing light effects, you want to be at 32 bits per channel. You'll get more dynamic range. So working at 32 bits per channel, I'm going to go back to my glow, and I'm going to adjust the threshold and the radius. Let's increase the radius a little bit. Let's make that threshold right about there. Like that. I'll switch this over to full. And there we've got our fire. So that's an example of getting your effect once, duplicating the layers, and then adjusting how that effect goes to each layer. And we got something pretty nice from just a simple geometric shape, and now it no longer looks that computerized. It's got a much more organic randomness to it. Were you able to follow along to all that, Ariana? Let me know when you got yours working. And that's an example of using a grayscale image. Yep, okay. All right. Well, that's an example of how you can use a grayscale image to be a displacement map to drive your animation. We did all that with just 4 keyframes. We did the offset going upward, and then the evolution. And that's what you get with just 4 keyframes. So, like I said, it's really just a combination of doing these basics, setting your anchor point, because that's going to drive your animation, thinking about what you want to do, then moving your playhead and clicking on the stopwatches that you want to animate or drive your effects with. Yeah, without a doubt. I'll give you that to your work email. No problem. And you'll be able to break it down and dissect it. All right. Do you have any other questions on anything that you might want to learn tonight? Yeah, you'll be able to look at my file and see how it goes. And like I said, when you're doing fractal displacement, it's grayscale. And you see how white does 100% of something and black does 100% of something else. So use those grayscale values to drive your effect. It's very useful. Yep, every Monday and Wednesday, 6 to 8:30 for the rest of the semester. So you can sit in and hear how I answer students' questions and learn off that, and ask me anything throughout the day at work. So it's a great way to fill some time and learn new things, while there's stuff's going on in the world. Yep, no problem at all. I'm going to be heading over to my family soon because there's one other person on, and it's not one of my students. They haven't written to me in the chat box yet. But one of my students was on earlier. I don't know what it is. Okay, yeah. So, Yeah, I'll be on tomorrow, and I'll send you this file after I sign off. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, and I hope you have a great night and stay safe out there. Okay, well, thanks to everyone else, and have a great evening, and I hope you found this helpful. And remember, just keep experimenting, and if you have any questions, just sign on to one of these next live streams, and feel free to answer away. Thank you very much, and have a great evening.